Hello and welcome back to Seagulls Central. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. And if you're listening on the podcast, thank you so much for putting me in your ears and welcome back for another episode. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. If you've subscribed already, I appreciate you. If you haven't, hit that subscribe button below. Get your like and comments down below. It really helps me a lot. And I'd love to get involved and engage with you as much as possible. Today, I'm answering the question, was I wrong about Fabian Hürzeler? Have I made the wrong call about Fabian Hürzeler in the last few weeks? I've been pretty forthcoming in my view around him. I never once actually called for him to be sacked or said Fabian Hürzeler out or anything like that, but I've had my questions and I've had a lot of them, and they've been niggling and rumbling on throughout the season, and I hadn't really been able to shift them. However, since really that Nottingham Forest game at the start of Feb, Brighton kind of don't look a different team, but they've had some good results. Obviously, the double win against Chelsea in the Cup and League, against Southampton, getting a good result, etc., etc., etc. We've looked in better nick and we've looked impressive. We look like a goal-scoring team. We look like a team who are pretty resolute, and things have turned around. And actually, after one freak result, I think many questions, to be honest, were rightly asked. But I think the question the question that's been going around the fan base in the last few weeks is actually, all of you Fabian naysayers need to get a grip. You need to look in the mirror. You need to, he's proven you wrong. Well, has he proven us wrong? And I think that's the question I want to get into today, because I think there's so many layers to my views on the whole Fabian Hürzeler thing and where everything is at with kind of him as our manager and the squad this season and how the team's looking and how this season's going to pan out. Because it could still be very positive, but there are some, in my opinion, still pretty interesting kind of glaring opportunities. Now, let's get into it. So my main criticism of Fabian Hürzeler was and has been around the playing style. I never really quite understood what the playing style was. It always felt like, different horses for different courses, quite a pragmatic approach, where he'll change it tactically game by game, but actually sometimes there'd be glaring holes in a midfield, or there'd be a bit of imbalance in terms of the lineup he puts out, or different, or just kind of a lack of a kind of obvious philosophy. And to be honest, I think throughout the season that is something. In the first half, up until about a month ago, I think that was something that was a very fair criticism to level at him. I actually think I have changed my mind on this, just in the sense that, in terms of my genuine kind of view on how I want football played, I do quite like the idea of being quite adaptable and being quite fluid in your tactics. And he certainly is that. My main criticism was that actually, in order to get behind someone and to leverage them a bit more time from a fan base perspective, you kind of need to have something a bit clearer to kind of show the fans, this is what I'm trying to do and I can take you here. And yeah, it's not quite working out, but I'm going to take you in this direction with this style. And there isn't that. There still isn't that. There hasn't been that. We can't go, oh, he's a pressing manager, or he's a, this manager, he's a that manager. He kind of feels like a bit of a combination of all the managers we've had since kind of, I say all the managers, the team managers we've had since Graham Potter. Possession-based football, maybe not like a hugely attacking focused team under Graham Potter, but also mixed in with that kind of, what do you call it, the kind of counter-pressing, where you bring them on to press you and you kind of play through them, a bit like we did under De Zerbi. Press baiting. We look like a good pressing side, for example, against Southampton. So the team has different facets, and I think tactically we've got to view that now, I think, as one of Fabian Hürzeler's strengths. My main criticism was that I actually didn't really think that was a strength, because I kind of felt, where are we going? What are we under you? And I don't know. I straddle this view of kind of being halfway between the two. I think I'm coming around to the fact that actually I think in the Premier League, being able to mix it up is very important, and being a team who have a philosophy just for the sake of having a philosophy isn't so useful. I spoke about it in my last video after the Southampton game around Russell Martin. Now, I think they shouldn't have sacked Russell Martin. However, with that said, I would have found it incredibly frustrating as a Southampton fan to be playing to be watching a team under a manager who was so stuck in his ways in terms of his principle. And I think a big thing about coming up to the Premier League when you're a promoted side is about being able to adapt. And we did that so well with Chris Hughton, obviously being a team who in the Championship were still pretty pragmatic, but were a goal-scoring team or a top two team. to going into the Premier League and having to mix it up, play a certain type of way, be realistic with how you're going to play. And it took us a couple of seasons before we could become a kind of possession-based team. Now, actually, with that said, I think you can say that what Fabian Hürzeler is doing is impressive because it's the Premier League. You need to be able to adapt your tactics. I think for me, it's just the lack of the clear identity. Do you know what I mean? And I said this before around who he is, what he offers. Does he bring us something to get behind? Does the style of play give us something to get behind? It was nice to see after the Southampton game him coming over to the fans and giving it a bit more. And I think that kind of connection between him and the fan base will only serve to help him, because I think that was I think that's a big part of why a lot of fans, when we looked a bit sus in a few games, maybe just after Christmas, over Christmas, and the Nottingham Forest game comes around and he kind of goes down the tunnel. I think it's just one thing after another kind of felt a bit uncomfortable. So I think that will help him. I think if he can just continue to kind of get these results where our wingers are so electric, our attackers are so technical and brilliant in the press, then obviously the kind of criticism will die away. My worry that I do still have, and I'll be completely honest about it, is that I do still wonder about the extent to which these wins are a result of us just having some fabulous players. Now, in the summer, we obviously recruited very, very well. We brought in players like Yankuba Minteh, Jorginho Rutter, Matt O'Reilly. We spent a lot of money on attacking players, and actually, is it just the fact that they're a lot of the players, including João Pedro, Danny Welbeck, Mitoma, Adingra, all of these players are actually just very good, dynamic, electric, attacking players who can win games on their own, who can, when they're all on form and linking up nicely, can score fantastic goals. And actually, you're playing against teams like Southampton or a Chelsea in disarray. I think that is still my question, because ultimately, until I see him up against the side who are not expected to be maybe away from home, or even a home game against like a Wolves or an Ipswich or a Southampton like we had earlier in the season, where a team's just going to sit back in a low block, how do we respond to that? Can we break them down? And I think often we're out of ideas. I don't look at that team and I don't look at the way we play and think there's a real kind of tactical outcry in terms of how Fabian's going to break those teams down. But look, he's copped a lot of criticism, and I do think he's probably still got 70% of the fan base. And, I think we need to set it in a bit of context in the fact that Brighton are very, they're in a decent chance of challenging for European football again this season. There's a good chance they could finish 8th, which would get them Conference League football. They're still in the FA Cup as things stand. It could still be a special season, and despite all of the kind of criticisms maybe around him personally or the way he plays, there's a lot to play for still this season. And even though, look, I think I'm still just waiting for something. I will be completely honest. I don't think anything I said in the past about Fabian Hürzeler has been unfair or wrong. And I do still stand by a lot of it, in the sense that I'm still kind of waiting for something. And I don't really know what that is, because you might level to me, well, we've beaten Man City, we've beaten Chelsea, double, we've gone away to Southampton, we've pulled out these massive results. What is it? And I think maybe, and I've said it before, I think it's maybe more of just a personality thing, where I'm kind of just struggling to get behind him. And I think maybe because we were so spoiled with De Zerbi last season, such an infectious, charming personality with that kind of, football that just woke us all up and kind of made us think, oh my God. It kind of just feels like, have we just brought in a kind of decent coach who's going to just try and continue the cycle and kind of work with good players that we've got? And actually, if you've got good players and a decent coach, then you're going to get all right results. Because I think, you look at like Bournemouth and they look like a really, really interesting side in the way they play. It's complex. It's a change from Gary O'Neill. It's an elevation from Gary O'Neill. And I think maybe the challenge that Fabian Hürzeler is having is that De Zerbi had so much kind of money in the bank with the fan base in terms of the way that he was playing and the style of it and the results that he got, in his first season. That actually, if Fabian Hürzeler maybe doesn't live up to that, if he doesn't achieve European football this season and his football isn't quite as clear to the naked eye and there's not as much for us to get behind, Is that maybe why kind of he would get a little bit more flack? That's maybe why some of us in the fan base are still a bit unsure of him. I think that genuinely could be why. I think Brighton will spend money again in the summer. They'll probably support him, and I'd be shocked if they parted ways with him in the summer. But I think all the conversations we did have were right after the Nottingham Forest game. Losing 7-0 in the way we did after looking pretty unconvincing in kind of terms of the style of play we were showing prior to that. I think the questions were right to be asked. Should you sack a manager after that? And I do stand by it. But I think just going forward, I think we're seeing glimpses of what he can do. I think particularly in those 2 games against Chelsea, the second game in particular, I thought we looked a lot more tactically interesting. I think we saw the changes. We're beginning to see more changes that he makes off the bench and the impact that his substitutions can have. So I think there's obviously a lot to be cheerful about and hopeful about when it comes to kind of what's going on with Fabian Hürzeler. And we're still in with a chance of doing some very, very impressive things this season. The question is, if we don't achieve Europe, if we finish 9th or out the FA Cup and we continue playing well, I think that's still very good for Brighton. Of course, it's amazing. I always say staying up on goal difference in 17th place is a result for Brighton. So even if we finish in the top half still, I think that gives us a really nice platform to build with Fabian Hürzeler next season. But in terms of was I wrong, do I think I was directly wrong about what I said about Fabian Hürzeler? I do and I don't. I think ultimately I think the jury is still slightly out. I think there are questions that will be asked in his second season that will wake up the fans and kind of answer some of those questions a little bit for us, for better or for worse. I don't know yet. But with that said, I think we've seen some changes since the Nottingham Forest game. We've seen a side who can play differently. I like the fact that he's adaptable, that he can change his players. And also, I think we're coming into a period now where he's going to look to play a similar 11. He's going to find a more settled 11. Your first 6 months of the club, he's working out the players, the squad, the playing style, and what suits the Premier League best. And he's learning all the time. So I think now if we can go into this next kind of 5, 6, 7, 8 game period, maybe with a settled 11-ish, keeping 10 out of 11 players, 8 out of 11 players every game, I think that would be really useful. And I think we'll learn a lot about this side and probably a lot about Fabian Hürzeler. Where does that leave players like Matt O'Reilly, who joined in the summer, who haven't played much, if he's not even in the team now and it's not looking like he's going to get in it? It's very interesting. But football can change quickly and players can, change quickly and results can change quickly. So I think there might be an appetite for him in the not too distant future to come and start. But I'd love to know your thoughts. Have your thoughts on Fabian Hürzeler changed since that Nottingham Forest game? Do you think I've ever been too harsh about him? I'd love to know kind of where you think, do you think you were too harsh on him? Where do you think the fan base lies on? I think there's still an overwhelming majority that kind of believes in what he's doing. But how much is it the players and how much is it him? I guess that's the question that I still need answering from me, because I just don't think I know yet. So yeah, please let me know in the comments below. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. It really means a lot to me. And I will see you after Newcastle in the FA Cup on Sunday evening. And in the meantime, up the Albion.